welcome back to another video. This is Yolo from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest. And for today's Prelim Paper review, it is a JC2 WA1 special. And it is from 2026 Tampines Meridian Junior College, H2 Chemistry, JC2 WA1. Now before I begin, these are the questions that I feel are interesting and probably worth your time to try. And if you would like to try this paper, you're invited to join my Telegram channel where I've uploaded a short summary along with the download link on my blog. Have a go at it, let me know how you did. And yes, I have started a tuition center. It's located near Boon King and SAJC. Regular classes are up and running and the full schedule can be found on my website. And for students who like a deeper analysis, you're welcome to subscribe to me on YouTube where my Prelim Paper review will go more in depth in terms of the question analysis and what exactly is so special about it. So what are you waiting for? Link is in the bio and I'll see you there. Firstly, this is not the hardest of WA and it is perfectly fine because for a lot of schools, even in universities, term 1 is considered a really short term. A lot of holidays, mainly because of Chinese New Year, Total Defense Day, a lot of events going on, and therefore a lot of your school curriculum time is being eaten away by all this stuff that is not exactly academic. And therefore, a lot of teachers are going to feel squeezed and they may not feel that they have adequate time to prepare their students. And hence, a WA like this that is after Chinese New Year, and not only that, potentially easier. And for the students who have done well, congratulations. But at the same time, be aware of why you scored well for this paper and whether you can really cope with a harder paper. For the weaker students, passing this paper shouldn't be an issue. And if you fail, it is a red flag. And I'm going to explain to you why. How? Via my 3 matrices. Number 1, relevance. Number 2, insightfulness. Number 3, difficulty. Before I give an overall score and recommend to you the type of student who should try this paper. And of course, if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, what would be a fair expectation of him from me in order for him to score an A in his actual A levels? Firstly, relevance, topics tested, solubility product, periodicity, organic chemistry, all the way up to arenes. To be frank with you, the scope of the paper, given that some of these topics were taught in J1, not the most extensive, but because of a limitation that I spoke about just now, this is what happens and we just have to deal with it. But if we look at the topics tested closely in this paper, periodicity, 11 marks. And if you look at the periodicity questions, most of them are textbook questions. Most of them, if you memorize, you have scored full credit for it. In other words, this 11 marks, which happens to be slightly less than 50% of this paper, is the easiest score to get. And more importantly, a lot of the questions asked in the periodicity part is indeed relevant, is indeed common in most of the H2 Chemistry paper 3. And if we move on to the next topic, solubility product, they actually made it a bit special. Usually when we talk about testing for precipitation, mixing of samples, we like to speak about equal volumes. And that's when students tend to make mistakes because of careless mistakes, forgetting to change the concentration. But in this case, they actually change it to 50 cm3 and 75 cm3. In a way, it makes you aware. And for the students who are not aware that you're supposed to change the concentration, this is the problem. Even though this is not the most relevant, it is trying to help you by raising a red flag. And then finally, the organic chemistry part, let's be real, this is rather flat. Mechanism, after that, asking you to explain some part of the mechanism where the question is very similar to the one in CJ. They ask about ICL and why the I plus electrophile is formed instead. And then obviously, you talk about alkenes versus your benzene ring. And then finally, your organic synthesis. All these are relevant questions. However, these are the watered down version. More about it later on in difficulty and insightfulness. But overall, the relevance of this paper is there. In fact, they are easy on the eye precisely because they seem familiar, not just in terms of other schools' paper, not just in terms of your lecture notes, but more importantly, relevant to what you have seen in your tutorials. And hence, the relevance of this paper will be given a rather solid 7 out of 10. Next, insightfulness. This paper has been watered down. Periodicity, like I said, the whole part, they just give you the 11 marks. If you memorized it, there is no way that you're getting any of this wrong. And therefore, the insights from here is not necessarily there. And some of you may argue, what is there to extrapolate? What is there to be creative about in periodicity? And I would agree with you. But then again, this also means that we can just take these periodicity ideas and apply some level of contextual question to it where we tell a story behind it. It can be a simple one, but ultimately the question breaks down to something like this. Still fair, and it bumps up the insightfulness of this paper by having a clear anchor question. And that is the weakness of this paper. 3 questions: organic chemistry, solubility, product, periodicity. None of them try to incorporate some level of context, which is unusual in a TMJC paper. In fact, if you look at all the TMJC paper 2 in the past couple of years, they are one of the more interesting papers to look at precisely because of the context. But this paper does not offer any of that. But that is not to say there are no insights. If you look at the solubility product, like I said, it could have been equal volumes and most students will fall into a trap by forgetting to divide the concentration by 2. But this went a bit further by changing it to a 50 cm cube versus 25 cm cube. Proportion will change and therefore your calculation will be a bit different. And for sure, it is unusual. And for some of you, it may seem like this is making it more difficult for you. But to me, this is trying to stop you from making a careless mistake, because sometimes when you see words versus numbers of 50 cm cube and 25 cm cube, you just ignore the word and then you forget to divide by 2. Stuff like that, it can happen. And that could be a small insight in this paper. And the biggest part about this paper in terms of insights, the organic chemistry question. It is a clear example of how it's being watered down. Number one, drawing a mechanism, no doubt, it is going to come out, especially for WA1. We expect it and they did not change anything about it. That's perfectly fine. Follow a textbook example. And then it went to ask you a bit more about mechanism, which is what you see in the CJC 2026, JC2 WA1 as well. Perfect. Asked you about mechanism to see whether you understand about the mechanism rather than you memorize. However, when you get to synthesis, look very carefully at how they made the synthesis question. From the alkene, it forms a HBr, and then they only ask you for the reagent condition before getting to the molecule that is a ring. In fact, this is an intramolecular attack. If you look at other Prelim papers, if you look at some of the WA from other schools, this part is blank. That means some schools will try to test you on whether you are able to draw a ring structure, whether you're able to identify forming a 5-member ring versus a 6-member ring when there's an intramolecular reaction. But this question chose to stay away from that. It chose to give you the molecule and then ask you for what it forms upon oxidation. This is significantly easier. This is significantly less taxing on the skills required of you, and therefore the insights of this is significantly lower. In other words, it is a paper that could have been more. Now that is not to say that there is no value in this paper. There are, but it is very minimal and is barely making the mark. And like I said, I understand. But this doesn't take away the fact that the insightfulness of this paper is rather average. You'll only be given a rather fair 5 out of 10. Next, difficulty. Not a difficult paper. Number one, strip of context. Unlike what you see in most TMJC Prelim papers, no storytelling, no real data to take apart. What about the length of the paper? Yes, 45 minutes. Maybe some of you will find that the time is too short. And why would you find that the time is short? It's not because of the organic chemistry part, because organic chemistry, by now if you haven't realized, is a you know or you don't know kind of question. Then you talk about solubility product. Maybe it'll take you some time to calculate. That's fine, and I understand that. And some of you, maybe the biggest resistance you put up is, look at question 1, it's so long, so many things to write. But then again, I refer back to what I said at the very beginning. Periodicity, if you memorize it, what is this to you? It's really just putting all of it out there, making sure that you have the keywords, and maybe some of you try to be a bit intelligent by making the question a bit more succinct, a bit more condensed, and maybe you get marked down 1 or 2 marks. But ultimately, if you look at the longest paper in this question, question 1, it is not supposed to take you the longest time, because if you study for your test, this is where you are going to pass the test. And then what gets you a B is knowing how to solve for most of the parts in your organic chemistry question, and what gets you an A is scoring full credit for the solubility product and being perfectly aware of what is going on in terms of calculation, common ion effect, and why when the ionic product is greater than the KSP, precipitation will happen. And hence, the difficulty of this paper, I understand, maybe a rather short paper, but if you look at the topics being tested, look at how the paper is being set, how the questions are being phrased, how it's being structured, it is not a difficult paper. But that is by no means the fault of the school. We understand why. However, again, it doesn't take away the fact that this is indeed easier WA1, and hence the difficulty of this paper will be given a lower than average 4 out of 10. Overall, I see value in this paper, but mostly for the weaker students. Because if you score an A for this paper, or even if you scored full marks for this paper, I congratulate you. You done well for this paper, but is that enough for me to say that you're clearly a class above the rest? I would be lying to you by telling you that this is good enough, by giving you a false sense of security. If you compare this to a CJ paper, yes, there are some parts that I don't like. Yes, there are some questions I do not agree on. I do see some similarities in terms of the questions. However, that paper seemed to push their students a lot more. It's still not drifting too far away from your lecture notes or your tutorial questions or your revision packages. This is almost too close to what you see in your tutorial questions. And therefore, to me, this paper is to sieve out for the weaker students. Ultimately, this is term 1. If we realize that you are not catching up right now, at least we can see a red flag. We don't have to draw you out immediately and say that you're not good enough and maybe you have to attempt remedial, but at least we know where this is going, and maybe this is a slip up, and then in term 2, we'll re-evaluate again when we look at your WA2. But realize this, your school purposely put it after Chinese New Year and not just a few days after Chinese New Year, several weeks after Chinese New Year, so that you have time to prepare. And if by now you still cannot score at least 12 out of 25 and explain how 11 marks came from periodicity, this is going to be a problem for you. And therefore, this paper to me is a stepping stone for students to, in a way, ease into JC2 and then slowly progress higher and higher in terms of difficulty. And that's what I'm predicting to see in the next couple of WAs. The questions are going to be progressively harder and harder. It's going to progress to a level that you see in most TMJC papers in the past couple of years of H2 chemistry that I really enjoy a lot. And if scoring a B or just passing for this paper will make you happy and jump for joy, I'm happy for you, but be aware, this is nowhere near the standards or creativity that we have seen in the track record of the TMJC papers that I've enjoyed so much in the past couple of years. And hence, the overall score of this paper will be given a slightly below average 4 out of 10. And if I had a student who had to sit for this paper under exam condition, a fair expectation of him would be 85% in order for him to score an A in his actual A levels. Finally, who I recommend this paper to? I recommend this paper to the weaker students to try as a time practice. And this is not just for any topics. And this specifically for students who are weak in the topics being tested in this paper. I don't see too much challenge in this paper. If you have your notes next to you, chances are you can score full credit for this. And for me, the best part of this paper is not in organic chemistry, it's not in solubility product, it's in the periodicity. I love how extensive and how much coverage it has of the chapter, and how it kept to just knowing and maybe memorizing some of the more key details in this chapter. And hence, if you're a student looking for a time practice in solubility product, organic chemistry, and especially periodicity, and you want to try it under exam condition with a paper that is not too difficult, that will ease you into JC2 and ease you into the rest of the revision, this paper will be perfect for you. Alright, so we have come to the end of this Prelim Paper review of 2026 Tampines Meridian Junior College H2 Chemistry JC2 WA1. Now if you like what I'm doing, follow me on TikTok, like my video, comment and share with your friends. I'm sure this will help them. And also don't forget to go onto my YouTube and watch a more in-depth analysis of this paper, and also remember to subscribe, because ultimately I'm on my way to 10,000 followers, nothing else. This is your love from Vantage Tutor, a class above the rest. Take care.